Welcome to the Ego's Theater, how we play different roles in life. In this insightful audiobook, we explore the intricate dynamics of the ego and its profound influence on our lives. Through real-life examples and practical insights, we uncover how the ego shapes our behaviors, relationships, and self-identity. Join us as we delve into the various personas we adopt, the masks we wear, and the impact of ego on success, failure, and mental health. Learn to recognize and confront the ego's grip and discover how to balance ego with authenticity and vulnerability. Embark on this journey to understand the ego's role in society and creativity, and gain the tools to cultivate humility, embrace vulnerability, and live a more authentic life. Let's begin this transformative exploration into the many roles we play in the theater of life. Chapter 1: Understanding the Ego. Defining the ego. Understanding the ego's concept often feels like looking into a mirror and seeing layers of ourselves that we rarely acknowledge. While the ego is typically seen as our sense of self, it's far more complex, impacting how we perceive, react, and interact with the world. Through my own experiences and reflections, I've come to see the ego as a protective yet sometimes disruptive force. It is what tells us to stand our ground, to prove our worth, and to seek validation. This was evident in my own life when I found myself constantly striving for perfection. It wasn't until I began to question why I needed to be seen as perfect that I understood the ego's desire for approval and fear of being less than. Exploring the various layers of the ego starts with empathy. Each layer represents different facets of our identity, from the masks we wear to the insecurities we shield from others. I've noticed that the ego can be a double-edged sword. It drives us to achieve, yet it can also create barriers between us and others. Consider, for instance, a time when a friend received a promotion. Instead of celebrating her success, I felt a pang of jealousy and a sense of inadequacy. That reaction wasn't about her accomplishment, it was about my ego feeling threatened. Recognizing this allowed me to shift my perspective and genuinely share in her joy, highlighting the compassionate side of the ego that craves connection and mutual recognition. Each dimension of the ego can be understood through self-awareness and mindfulness. Every emotion we experience often ties back to our ego's intricate dance between self-preservation and self-assertion. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers at a networking event. Your ego might immediately kick in, sizing up the room, feeling the pressure to impress, and fearing rejection. In such scenarios, I found it helpful to pause and breathe, acknowledging the ego's presence but not letting it dictate my actions. This practice helps to dismantle the ego's defensive mechanisms and fosters a more genuine, less anxiety-driven interaction. By understanding these layers, through personal reflection and mindful practices, we can begin to live more authentically, balancing our need for self-assurance with a deeper sense of humility and openness. The ego's influence on behavior. As someone who has spent countless hours observing my own actions and reactions, I've come to realize that the ego plays a huge role in shaping our behavior. It's like a hidden puppet master that influences how we respond to different situations. For instance, when I feel slighted by a colleague, my immediate reaction often stems from ego. It's that part of me that wants recognition and validation. I can remember a time when a simple offhand remark made by a friend felt like a personal attack. It took me some reflection to understand that my ego was bruised, not my true self. In moments of decision-making, the ego often whispers in our ear, telling us to choose the option that brings the most external validation. I recall deciding between two job offers. One was high-paying but soul-crushing, while the other was in a field I loved but paid less. The ego nudged me toward the high-paying job because it equated money with success. In the end, I chose the latter, which brought me both happiness and fulfillment. This taught me that the ego's voice isn't always aligned with our true desires or what's best for us in the long run. Our behavioral patterns over time also bear the imprint of the ego. Think of how we respond to compliments or criticism. When I receive praise, it's easy to let it inflate my ego, making me feel superior. Conversely, criticism hits hard and often leads me to react defensively. Understanding this, I've started observing my reactions to feedback more carefully. Recognizing that these responses are ego-driven rather than rational helps me stay grounded and open to growth. If you ever find yourself reacting strongly to someone's opinion, take a moment to question whether it's your true self or your ego reacting. This awareness can be incredibly freeing and lead to more authentic interactions with others. Challenges of egocentric thinking. I remember a time when I was stuck in my own bubble of egocentric thinking. Everything that happened around me seemed to revolve around my own feelings, my own opinions, and my own experiences. One day, a close friend of mine mentioned a difficulty she was having at work. Instead of listening and offering empathy, I immediately started comparing her situation to mine. It wasn't until I saw the disappointment on her face that I realized I had made the conversation about me, rather than supporting her. Many of us have moments like this. We fail to step out of our own heads and appreciate the different perspectives and experiences of others. Addressing the limitations of this thinking requires us to become aware of our own biases and actively work to counteract them. When we're trapped in our own perspective, we limit our understanding of the world. In relationships, for instance, egocentric thinking can cause misunderstandings and feelings of isolation. Imagine being in an argument with a loved one. We're often so focused on validating our own point of view that we fail to actually hear what the other person is saying. This often leads to unresolved conflicts and a lack of mutual respect. Learning to navigate the pitfalls of self-centered perspectives is an ongoing process. It requires intention and practice. One effective strategy I've found is to consciously shift focus from myself to others. When someone is speaking, I make an effort to truly listen, the kind of listening where I am fully present and not just waiting for my turn to talk. It's like opening a window to fresh air, resulting in richer, more meaningful interactions. By regularly reflecting on how my actions and words impact others, I start to see the world through a wider lens, broadening my empathy and deepening my connections. Every now and then, catch yourself in a moment of self-centeredness and gently remind yourself to step out of your own shoes and step into someone else's. It's astonishing how big the world can seem when you do. Chapter 2: The Persona We Play. The Chameleon Effect. We've all been there, a social gathering where we feel out of place or a new workplace where we just can't find our footing. In these moments, I often find myself adapting, morphing into someone who can blend seamlessly into the fabric of the environment. This phenomenon is what I call the chameleon effect. We change our personas based on our surroundings, as if adopting a camouflage to avoid standing out or to be deemed more acceptable. This might mean dressing differently for a family event than we do with friends, or altering our speech to align with the tone of a corporate meeting. It's a survival mechanism, a tool we use to navigate a world that's constantly shifting around us. However, this constant shape-shifting isn't without its struggles. Imagine you're wearing 1,000 different masks, each fitting a separate scenario. It gets exhausting, doesn't it? I recall a time when I attended a high-profile event, and despite putting on my best confident persona, I felt like an imposter. The fear of being found out gnawed at me. It was a relentless, underlying tension, pulling me between the need to blend in and the desire to be my true self. This internal conflict makes finding genuine self-expression incredibly challenging. How do you stay true to yourself when you're constantly adapting to fit into every new situation? The answer isn't simple, but acknowledging this struggle is the first step in the journey toward authentic self-expression. In these experiences, I've learned the importance of creating small pockets of authenticity even amidst the need to adapt. It's about finding little moments where you can let your guard down safely, even if it's just with a close friend or in the privacy of your own space. For anyone grappling with these internal battles, know that it's okay to wear those masks, but it's equally okay to take them off and show the world the real you, even if it's a little bit at a time. Start noticing the contexts where you feel comfortable and let those be your refuge, a place where blending in is unnecessary. Social roles and expectations. Living up to societal roles and expectations sometimes feels like a weight pressing down on us. I remember being asked to be a perfect student, to succeed academically while behaving impeccably, even though I had my own dreams and desires. It's this invisible script we're all expected to follow: be a good child, an excellent worker, a flawless parent. The pressure to conform often stifles genuine self-expression and makes it difficult to embrace who we truly are. When I was younger, I often found myself mimicking others just to fit in, sacrificing my quirks and the things that made me, me. Embracing the complexities of identity isn't easy, but it's incredibly rewarding. It's like peeling back layers to discover your true self. I remember the first time I stood up for something I believed in, defying the expected norm. It felt liberating, as if a heavy mask had been lifted. Interactions began to feel more genuine, and I could see that others also struggled with these societal boxes. Realizing that no one fits perfectly into one role, and accepting that we can be multifaceted, is powerful. It transforms how we see ourselves and others, making room for empathy and understanding. Social dynamics, when embraced with an open mind, can be a rich tapestry of diverse identities. Masks we wear. Have you ever noticed how we seem to become different people depending on where we are and who we are with? Maybe when we're at work, we are professional and poised, speaking confidently about our projects and goals. Yet, at home, we might turn into a different version of ourselves, more relaxed, perhaps even goofy, sharing inside jokes with our family. These changes are so seamless that we hardly even recognize them as the layers of masks we wear in different situations. Think back to the last time you were at a social gathering. How many times did you catch yourself adjusting your speech, posture, or even your laugh? It's like we have this built-in mechanism that scans the environment and automatically shifts gears to blend in. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Masks serve to protect us, helping us navigate through life's myriad social structures. But it can become overwhelming to maintain so many different versions of ourselves. There's a subtle, often silent, exhaustion that comes with the constant switching. Let's delve deeper into this. Why do we feel the need to wear these masks? Society often sets expectations, invisible but palpable, about how we should behave, speak, and even think. Conformity feels like a safety net because stepping out of these invisible lines means facing uncertainties, judgments, and sometimes ostracism. However, while these masks protect and help us fit in, they can also trap us, disconnecting us from our true selves. Embracing authenticity in the face of societal masks is like pulling off those layers, a bit daunting at first, but incredibly liberating. Authenticity doesn't mean disregarding social nuances or becoming brutally blunt, but rather staying true to who you are even in the most demanding situations. The first step towards this is self-awareness, recognizing when and why we slip into different masks. Sometimes just being aware that we are doing it can shed a lot of the weight. It's essential to understand that authenticity fosters genuine connections. When we present our true selves, we attract people who resonate with us on a deeper level. This builds a sense of belonging not based on pretense, but on mutual understanding and respect. The process of staying authentic might not be a smooth sail. There will be moments of discomfort and vulnerability. But these moments are also opportunities for growth and deeper self-acceptance. Here's a practical tip: start small. Begin by observing your interactions and identifying the triggers that make you switch masks. Then, consciously choose moments where you can let your guard down, even if just a little. Share a piece of your true thoughts or feelings without worrying excessively about the judgments you might face. The goal isn't to eliminate all masks, but to slowly integrate your true self into your various roles. Over time, you'll find that maintaining authenticity becomes second nature, making your social navigations less of a tightrope walk and more of an enjoyable journey. Chapter 3: The Ego's Impact on Relationships. Ego clashes. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of an argument that seemed to escalate out of nowhere? If so, you're not alone. Often, these conflicts are driven by ego clashes, where the real issue gets overshadowed by a battle of wills. I remember one instance at work where a colleague and I were tasked with leading a project. We both had strong opinions about the direction it should take. Before I knew it, our discussion turned into a heated debate. It wasn't about the project anymore, it was about who was right. Our egos were in control, blinding us to the actual goal. Power struggles like these are common. They can happen in professional settings, friendships, and even within families. They occur when individuals vie for dominance, driven by a need to assert superiority or validation. The irony is, these battles are often fruitless, only serving to alienate and obstruct collaboration. Recognizing when an ego clash is brewing can be the first step towards diffusing it. When navigating such ego-driven conflicts, empathy becomes an invaluable tool. I recall another situation where I was at odds with a close friend. Initially, I felt my perspective was the only valid one. However, after taking a step back, I tried to see things from their viewpoint. It wasn't easy at first, but the more I understood their feelings and motivations, the clearer it became that our clash wasn't about right or wrong. It was about being heard and valued. Developing empathy involves active listening, withholding immediate judgment, and genuinely striving to understand the other person's perspective. By doing so, you create a space where mutual respect can flourish, making it possible to address the root issues rather than escalating the conflict. As I traversed through different experiences, I began to see the importance of self-awareness. A practical tip that has worked for me is to pause before reacting in the heat of the moment. Taking a few deep breaths or even excusing myself for a brief walk has helped in gaining composure. This small act can prevent the ego from hijacking the conversation, allowing for a more balanced approach. Remember, the goal isn't to win, but to reach a meaningful resolution or understanding. Maintaining this mindset helps bridge the gap created by ego clashes, fostering healthier and more productive interactions. Overcoming ego in communication. There was a time when I thought my perspective was the most important one in any conversation. I believed that my ideas were inherently superior, not out of malice, but simply because they were mine. This is the subtle yet powerful influence of ego. It's that little voice that says you're right and others are wrong, often leading to misunderstandings and conflict. We all have it, it's part of being human. Learning to recognize and manage this can transform our interactions. I remember a meeting where I was passionately presenting my ideas. My colleague, Sarah, had a different vision. Initially, I dismissed her input, thinking she just didn't get it. My tone became defensive. But as I caught myself, I paused and truly listened. Surprisingly, her perspective had merit that complemented mine. That moment showed me how ego hinders communication and that softening it could open doors to collaboration. Understanding each other is about building bridges, not walls. Consider a situation where two friends, Tom and Ravi, had a falling out. Tom felt hurt because Ravi didn't attend his party. Instead of expressing his feelings, Tom accused Ravi of being inconsiderate. Ravi, in turn, defended himself, leading to a heated exchange. Had Tom approached the conversation with empathy, saying, "Ravi, I felt hurt when you didn't show up. Can we talk about it?" The outcome could have been different. Communicating with an awareness of our egos allows us to express ourselves without antagonizing others, fostering deeper connections. In another instance, I worked with a team on a challenging project. There was a lot of tension as deadlines loomed. One evening, we had a heart-to-heart. We acknowledged our feelings, stress, pressure, and fear of failure. By laying our egos aside and understanding each other's vulnerabilities, we transformed that stress into mutual support. It was a turning point that taught me the power of ego-aware communication. It's about recognizing our shared human experience and extending grace and understanding. Next time you find yourself in a heated dialogue, take a moment to breathe. Reflect on whether the ego is steering the conversation. Practice active listening, where you truly hear the other person without planning your response. Show curiosity and ask questions to understand their perspective. It's not about agreeing, but about valuing diverse viewpoints. Such empathy can break down barriers and build lasting bridges of connection and understanding. The vulnerability behind ego. In my own journey, I've often found that the root of my ego-driven behaviors wasn't confidence or strength, but rather a sense of insecurity and fear. It took some deep reflection to unearth what was really going on. For instance, when I would confront others with a haughty attitude or dismiss their opinions, it wasn't because I truly believed I was superior. I was afraid of being seen as inferior, weak, or incompetent. My ego acted as a shield, protecting me from facing these uncomfortable feelings. When I started to understand this, I realized that many of us allow our egos to lead because we're terrified of letting down our guard. Imagine situations where we've shut down meaningful conversations with defensive retorts, or where we've sidelined collaboration due to a need to control every aspect. These are patterns driven by an underlying fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. My ego was a mask hiding my genuine self, and that mask kept me from forming the authentic connections I deeply desired. Through empathetic self-awareness, I began to see vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a profound source of strength. Opening up about my uncertainties and flaws invited others to do the same, creating a space of mutual respect and understanding. There was clarity in recognizing that sharing our true selves fostered deeper, more genuine relationships. By allowing vulnerability to be a bridge, rather than a barrier, I was able to connect with others on a more sincere level. Next time you catch yourself acting out of ego, pause and ask what fear or insecurity might be bubbling beneath the surface. Embrace those vulnerabilities and share them with trusted individuals. The authenticity that stems from such interactions is remarkably liberating and fosters connections that can enrich your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Rather than concealing your true self, let your vulnerability be the magnet that attracts genuine and lasting relationships. Chapter 4: The Ego in Success and Failure. Ego's Influence on Ambition. I remember vividly the times when my ambition was in overdrive, a relentless force propelling me forward like a rocket barely held to the ground. Achieving great things, setting high standards, and challenging myself constantly felt fantastic. Honestly, it's intoxicating, a mix of adrenaline and the sheer joy of overcoming the impossible. But looking back, I can see the shadow of my ego hiding behind these ambitious pursuits. It's like that uninvited guest at a party who somehow manages to stay in every photo and leaves a lasting imprint, stirring the atmosphere just enough to make everything feel slightly out of balance. My achievements might glitter, but ego can also distort our motivations. Imagine a scenario where you are working incredibly hard, trying to outshine everyone in a competitive environment. At first, it feels like pure ambition pushing you forward. The satisfaction of another accolade or praise can reinforce this drive. Yet, sometimes, deep down, it might be the need to validate ourselves in others' eyes that directs our actions. I felt that sting the moment when you realize that the goal isn't purely about personal growth or passion, but rather about feeding an insidious desire for acknowledgement and admiration. It's a nuanced difference but profound in its impact. Ambition, when guided by ego, can become a perilous quest for external validation rather than internal fulfillment. Finding a balance between drive and ego-driven motivations isn't a one-time battle, it's a continuous journey. I've had to regularly pause, introspect, and recalibrate my intentions. It's easy for the lines to blur between working towards something you're genuinely passionate about and striving for recognition just to satisfy your ego. One practice that has helped me is setting clear, personal goals that resonate deeply with my values and passions, without the noise of external validation. I remind myself, the destination is only as gratifying as the journey itself. Purposeful ambition, aligned with one's core beliefs rather than ego, has the power to be much more fulfilling. Dealing with failure. Finding ourselves face to face with setbacks and disappointments can leave us feeling lost. I remember once preparing for what seemed like the most important presentation of my career. The nerves were intense, and despite my best efforts, things went south. My ego? It felt shattered, leaving me questioning my capabilities and self-worth. This, I realized, was the ego's desperate cry for validation, something I've seen countless friends and colleagues struggle with too. We often view failures as a direct attack on our identity rather than a natural part of life. By recognizing that setbacks don't define us, we can navigate these turbulent waters with more ease and less self-criticism. I started to see failures differently by understanding their purpose. Cultivating resilience became a pivotal part of my journey. Instead of allowing my ego to spiral into an identity crisis, I began asking myself, what can I learn from this? I recall a mentor's words, "Failure is feedback," which resonated deeply. It's in those low moments that we often find our most significant lessons. This shift in perspective helped me embrace failures as stepping stones rather than dead ends. By anchoring my self-worth in my values and growth, rather than external successes or failures, my ego felt less threatened, and I became more open to learning. Reflecting on my experiences, I found that the most useful strategy is focusing on the process rather than the outcome. When I began seeing every effort, regardless of its result, as progress, I felt a newfound sense of freedom and empowerment. Learning to be kind to ourselves during these times is crucial. Remember, it's completely human to feel down after a setback, but it's equally important to get back up with a heart full of determination and a mind ready to grow. The more we practice this, the stronger our resilience becomes, allowing us to navigate life's challenges with grace and wisdom. Staying humble in success. I've often found myself buoyed by achievements, intoxicated by the rush of hitting a milestone. The euphoria is real, almost tangible. Yet, in those moments of triumph, my ego can become my worst enemy. The potential pitfalls of ego in the face of success are numerous. It creeps in silently, whispering that I am more valuable now than before, that I've proven myself superior. This can lead to arrogance, isolating me from others and creating a false sense of invincibility. The connections I value can become strained, as my listening skills dull and empathy wanes. I start to believe I no longer need constructive critiques or those grounding voices that kept me balanced. It warps my view and hinders my personal growth. Recognizing these traps is crucial for staying humble. I remember a time when I received a significant promotion. Elated, I initially felt on top of the world. However, as weeks passed, my attitude subtly shifted. I started taking my colleagues for granted, and my once open-minded approach turned dismissive. It took a heartfelt conversation with a close friend to jolt me back. The lesson was clear: cultivating humility amidst achievements is not just beneficial but necessary. Gratitude became my anchor. I began to consciously acknowledge the support and opportunities one received. Celebrating small wins with my team, thanking them for their contributions, and sharing the spotlight helped me remain grounded. This practice built deeper connections and reinforced the understanding that success is rarely a solo journey. The key to maintaining this humility is a continuous effort. Each morning, I remind myself of the journey rather than the destination, valuing the process over the accolade. This perspective keeps me appreciative of every step, every struggle, every helping hand. It's not about deflecting success but embracing it with grace. By focusing on growth and community, by regularly reflecting on my true values, the balance between confidence and humility is achievable. One can bask in success without losing sight of what truly matters, the connections, the learning, and the gratitude for every experience that shapes us. Chapter 5: Ego and Self-Identity. Ego and Self-Worth. I once read a story about a young woman who spent her days tirelessly scrolling through social media, observing the seemingly perfect lives of others. She often compared herself to the images she saw, feeling a pang of inadequacy with each perfect photograph. This narrative, though old, is one many of us can relate to in our own ways. It highlights how our ego, often fed by external validation, can profoundly influence our self-worth and self-esteem. Our ego, in its simplest form, is a collection of thoughts and beliefs we have about ourselves. It's like an internal voice constantly judging our actions, worth, and significance. This voice can be kind and supportive, but it can also be critical and demanding. The tricky part is that our ego often strives to maintain a sense of superiority or importance. It thrives on external validation, compliments, likes, and achievements, anything that makes us feel valued in others' eyes. However, tying our sense of self-worth to these external factors is akin to building a house on quicksand. The more we rely on others to validate our worth, the more unstable and fragile our self-esteem becomes. Have you ever noticed how fleeting the satisfaction is after receiving a compliment or achieving a milestone? It's like a temporary high that quickly dissipates, leaving us craving for more. Consider a scenario where you work hard on a project at work. You put in endless hours, refine every detail, and finally present it, hoping for praise and acknowledgement. When the meeting concludes, the feedback is lukewarm, and you walk away feeling deflated, questioning your abilities. This is the ego's influence in action. When external recognition doesn't match our expectations, it leaves us feeling less than, which can deeply affect our self-worth and self-esteem. So, how do we navigate this? It starts with recognizing the ego's role in our perception and learning to empower our self-worth from within. Imagine looking into a mirror and affirming your value, independent of others' opinions. You are deserving of love, respect, and kindness simply because you exist, not because of what you achieve or how others perceive you. Self-affirmation is a practice that allows us to reclaim our worth from the clutches of external validation. It involves cultivating a mindful recognition of our inherent worthiness and nurturing ourselves with compassion and positive reinforcement. For instance, instead of waiting for others to acknowledge your hard work, take a moment to appreciate it yourself. Acknowledge your dedication, effort, and growth. This simple shift in perspective can gradually build a more resilient and grounded sense of self-worth. Additionally, practicing gratitude can help shift the focus away from what we lack towards what we have. By appreciating the small victories and the intrinsic value of our efforts, we can reinforce our self-esteem that isn't contingent upon external validation. Another practical tip is to engage in activities that bring genuine joy and fulfillment. Whether it's a hobby, exercise, or spending time with loved ones, these moments of authentic engagement can reinforce our intrinsic worth and lessen the ego's grip on our self-esteem. Remember, your value is not dictated by external measures but by the unique essence of who you are. Each step towards internal validation is a powerful stride towards a more authentic and enduring sense of self-worth. The illusion of control. It's fascinating how much effort we invest in trying to control every aspect of our lives. Think about the meticulous planning we do, the lists we make in an attempt to foresee every challenge, and the constant worry that comes with the need for things to go exactly as we expect. All this stems from a place within us driven by our ego's desire for control. But have you ever wondered what kind of stress this creates? The perpetual pressure to have everything in our grip, to ensure that nothing goes amiss, shapes how we see ourselves. It's like we identify our worth and capability through our ability to control outcomes. Yet in this process, we often lose sight of who we truly are beyond our roles as planners and controllers. However, life is inherently uncertain, and our relentless need to control it often leads to disappointment. Probably each of us can recall instances where, despite our best efforts, things didn't go as planned. Maybe a big project at work didn't deliver the results we hoped for, or a meticulously arranged event was derailed by unforeseen circumstances. These moments can be deeply frustrating, but they also highlight an essential truth: control is often an illusion. By embracing uncertainty, we allow ourselves to experience life more fully. Imagine the freedom in relinquishing the illusion of absolute control. Anxiety about the future diminishes, and we're able to appreciate the present moment more sincerely. My journey of learning to let go wasn't easy, and I suspect it won't be for anyone. But a pivotal moment for me was realizing that uncertainty isn't something to be feared, but rather a reminder of our human experience. I found that as I started embracing the unknown, I began to discover parts of myself that I had neglected. Spontaneity became less daunting, and I noticed an increase in my authentic happiness. A practical step to start this journey is to consciously acknowledge when you are trying too hard to control an outcome. Take a deep breath, step back, and allow things to unfold naturally. Embrace the uncertainty and watch how it opens doors to unexpected joy and growth. Reframing self-image. For most of my life, I let ego-driven narratives dictate how I saw myself. I believed that to be worthy, I had to fit into certain molds and meet certain standards that society had laid out. If I didn't hit those marks, I felt like less of a person. The constant comparison with others became a damaging habit that affected my mental and emotional well-being. What I didn't realize at the time was that these narratives were limiting me, boxing me into a version of myself that wasn't even true. It was a slow process, but I started to question these narratives. I challenged the stories I'd been telling myself for years, stories about not being good enough, not being successful enough, or not being attractive enough. I began to understand that many of these narratives were constructs of external influences and had little to do with who I really was. I asked myself what truly mattered to me, what made me unique, and how I wanted to define my self-worth. This introspection led me to a more authentic self-image, one not dictated by society's often unrealistic standards. In this journey of self-discovery, I learned to be kinder to myself. It wasn't just about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, it was also about accepting my imperfections. I realized that striving for perfection was a futile endeavor because, let's face it, perfection doesn't exist. Embracing my flaws became a powerful act of self-compassion. I stopped berating myself for mistakes and started seeing them as opportunities for growth. Each stumble was a lesson, a stepping stone towards becoming a better version of myself. If there is one practical tip I can give you, it's to start speaking to yourself the way you would talk to a dear friend. When you make a mistake, acknowledge it with kindness, learn from it, and move on. This shift in mindset can make a world of difference in how you perceive yourself, helping you build a more resilient, compassionate, and authentic self-image. Chapter 6: Confronting the Ego. Recognizing ego's grip. There have been countless times when I found myself reacting to situations in ways that seemed almost instinctual. But when I paused and really thought about why I acted the way I did, it became clear that something deeper was at play. This something was my ego. The ego's presence and influence are subtle yet powerful. It's that voice inside our head that constantly seeks validation, strives to be right, and fears judgment. Recognizing this grip is the first step towards understanding how it dictates much of our behavior. Often, I've caught myself in situations where my reactions were overly defensive or where I felt an insatiable need to prove a point. For instance, during a heated discussion with a friend, I noticed my heart racing and my voice getting louder. It was as if I was on autopilot, and the more I tried to assert my viewpoint, the more combative the conversation became. I realized much later that it wasn't about being right but rather about my ego's need to be seen as knowledgeable and superior. It's during these moments of reflection that the pattern becomes clear. The ego feeds on comparisons, thrives on competition, and latches onto any perceived threats to its identity. Another instance that stands out is when I kept checking my phone repeatedly after posting something online, anxiously awaiting likes and comments. This need for external validation was my ego's way of reinforcing my self-worth through others' approval. Having recognized how the ego holds me in its grip, the challenge then becomes about disentangling from these patterns. This starts with self-awareness and mindfulness. By being present in each moment and observing my reactions and thoughts without judgment, I can start to see the underlying motivations driven by my ego. It's like watching a play unfold and starting to understand each character's motives. I begin to see the ego not as a part of my true self, but as a separate entity that often clouds my judgment. One effective tool I've found is pausing before reacting. Taking a deep breath, counting to 10, or even stepping away from a heated situation can create the space needed to reflect rather than react. This pause disrupts the ego's automatic response, allowing me to approach the situation with a clearer mind and a more compassionate heart. It's in these moments of pause that I can remind myself that being right or validated isn't the goal. Connection, understanding, and growth are. Constructing a mental habit of regularly checking in with myself has also been invaluable. Simple questions like, "Why am I feeling this way?" or "What am I seeking from this interaction?" help me to discern whether my actions are ego-driven or aligned with my true self. This ongoing dialogue with myself fosters deeper self-awareness and gradually weakens the ego's grip. Remember, the journey of recognizing and disentangling from the ego isn't about eliminating it entirely. The ego is a part of us, and it has its place. It's about finding a balance and ensuring that it doesn't overshadow our true essence. It's about living with intention, where our actions and reactions are guided by genuine values and empathy rather than the ego's superficial demands. Ego and mindfulness. I've always found the interplay between ego and mindfulness to be more than a theoretical discussion. One day, during a heated argument with a close friend, I was acutely aware of my rising anger. My ego wanted to be right, to feel superior and justified in my opinions. However, a small voice inside urged me to step back and observe my feelings mindfully. I took deep breaths and paid attention to the sensations in my body. This shift in perspective allowed me to see how my ego was driving my reactions. By becoming mindful, I realized the argument was less about the actual issue and more about my need to protect my self-image. This awareness changed the dynamic of the conversation, making room for understanding and genuine communication. It was a liberating experience, akin to lifting a veil and seeing the true nature of my behavior. Cultivating a mindful perspective to manage the ego's hold on our thoughts and emotions isn't always straightforward. Picture this: you're in a work meeting, and a colleague dismisses your idea without much thought. Instantly, a wave of irritation washes over you. The ego is whispering that you have to defend yourself, to prove your worth. But what if, instead, you paused and took a mindful breath? By doing so, you could recognize that your irritation is a natural response, but not necessarily a helpful one. Mindfulness invites us to observe these ego-driven thoughts and emotions without judgment. It allows us to create a space where we can choose our response rather than react impulsively. This approach transforms our interactions and helps us manage situations with greater clarity and compassion. It's like turning on a light in a dim room. Everything becomes clearer and more manageable. A simple yet powerful practice to integrate mindfulness into daily life is to engage in a mindful pause. Whenever you feel the grip of ego tightening, be it through anger, jealousy, or defensiveness, take a few moments to pause and breathe deeply. Focus on the present moment and acknowledge your feelings without trying to change them. Over time, this practice helps diminish the ego's control, allowing you to respond to life's challenges with a balanced and aware mindset. You might notice your relationships improving and your stress levels decreasing. It's the small, consistent efforts that lead to profound shifts in how we experience life. Facing ego's critics. Navigating the challenges of ego-driven resistance and criticism can feel like wading through a maze where every twist and turn reveals a new obstacle. I've been there many times, feeling the sting of criticism that seemed more about the critic's ego than any genuine desire to help me. It's easy to get defensive in such moments, especially when the feedback feels personal. I remember once, during a team meeting, one of my colleagues pointed out an error I had made. Their tone and body language were more combative than constructive, and immediately, I felt my defenses spring into action. In these moments, it helps to remember that everyone brings their own insecurities and biases into interactions. By acknowledging this, I could take a step back and understand that such criticism often says more about the critic than about me. Finding the balance between constructive feedback and ego-driven defensiveness is like walking a tightrope. On one side, there's valuable growth and learning. On the other, there's the risk of letting our ego get in the way of our progress. Reflecting on my experiences, I've found that it's crucial to differentiate between feedback intended to help and comments meant to assert someone else's superiority. Listening to feedback with an open mind, even when it stings, by acknowledging my initial emotional response privately, allowed me to evaluate the feedback objectively. This practice doesn't invalidate my feelings, but rather places them in context, helping me to extract any useful insights while letting go of the negativity. Chapter 7: Balancing the Ego. Cultivating humility. Exploring the path to humility feels much like a personal journey through uncharted territory. It's a continuous process of confronting and understanding our ego's repeated attempts to dominate our thoughts and actions. Imagine a moment when someone criticizes your work unjustly. The ego's natural response might be to defend, retaliate, or dismiss the feedback entirely. However, as we strive to counteract this dominance, humility offers an alternative path. It encourages us to pause, reflect, and consider the critique objectively. I remember a time when a colleague pointed out a flaw in my approach to a project. Initially, my ego flared up in defense, but taking a step back and viewing the situation through the lens of humility allowed me to gain insight I would have otherwise missed. This shift in perspective can open doors to personal growth and improved relationships. Embracing humility serves as a powerful catalyst for growth, learning, and forming deeper connections. By maintaining an open mind and acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, we create a fertile ground for learning from others. There was a period in my life when I thought I needed to portray an image of perfection to earn respect. However, it was through moments of vulnerability and admitting my limitations that I truly connected with people around me. These interactions taught me invaluable lessons and fostered a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. When we show humility, we invite others to share their knowledge and experiences, which enriches our own understanding and strengthens our bonds with them. Authenticity versus ego. We all desire to live an authentic life, but this pursuit is often complicated by our ego-driven wants. I've encountered moments where my true self cried out for expression, but my ego's needy whispers drowned those cries, pushing me to seek validation from others. It's a struggle many of us face. On one hand, there's the yearning to be genuinely ourselves, to embrace our quirks, passions, and truths. On the other, our ego demands recognition, praise, and superficial markers of success. This internal conflict can create a paradox where the very essence of who we are is overshadowed by who we think we need to be. For instance, I remember a time when I genuinely enjoyed painting. It wasn't about showcasing my art in galleries or getting likes on social media, it was about the joy found in the strokes and colors. Yet, when I started seeking approval and accolades, the pure joy faded. My art became a chore, a means to an end dictated by my ego's desires. It took a lot of self-reflection to realize that authenticity isn't about forsaking recognition, but rather about not letting the desire for it control our actions. Recognition can be an outgrowth of authentic living, but shouldn't be the driving force. Finding space for genuine self-expression involves taming the ego's demands without outright dismissing them. I've learned that setting boundaries within myself is crucial. Whenever I feel the urge to seek validation, I pause and ask, what is my true intention here? Is this action resonating with my authentic self, or is it a plea for external validation? This practice of checking in with myself helps me redirect my energy towards actions aligned with my true self rather than my ego's incessant needs. Another practice that has been essential is surrounding myself with people who encourage authenticity over superficial success. It's easier to be genuine when we are supported by a community that values our true selves. Engaging in honest conversations and fostering relationships based on mutual respect rather than competition helps in creating a space where genuine self-expression can flourish. These relationships act as a mirror, reflecting back our true selves and gently nudging us away from ego-centered pursuits. Lastly, giving myself grace is a continuous part of the journey. There are days when my ego feels stronger, and that's okay. Recognizing this without judgment and gently steering back to my authentic path is essential. It's a balance that takes time to master, but with consistent self-awareness and compassion, it becomes easier to distinguish between the voice of authenticity and the murmur of the ego. Embracing vulnerability. I remember a time when the mere thought of showing my weaknesses to others made my heart race with fear. I believed that vulnerability meant exposure and exposure meant judgment. This fear shaped many of my interactions and kept me walled off from truly connecting with others. What I didn't realize then is that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. Instead, it is an incredible strength that disarms the ego's armor. Admitting our fears, anxieties, and uncertainties can be one of the most courageous acts we undertake. When we recognize our vulnerability, we start chipping away at the heavy armor that our ego uses to protect our insecurities. This armor, although seemingly sturdy, isolates us and creates barriers in our relationships. By embracing vulnerability, we allow ourselves to be human, relatable, and real. It's astonishing how dropping the facade can bring relief and create a more profound sense of connection. Our insecurities no longer dominate our interactions as we learn to accept and even honor them as parts of our true selves. Once I embraced vulnerability, my relationships changed dramatically. I started having authentic connections with others, and it felt like breathing fresh air after being in a confined space for too long. When I shared my struggles and fears openly, people didn't judge me, they related to me. They shared their own stories, their own moments of doubt, and suddenly, conversations became deeper and more meaningful. Vulnerability became the gateway to genuine human connections, and it facilitated my self-growth in ways I hadn't imagined. Being vulnerable is not easy. It takes practice and a shift in mindset to view it as a path to personal enrichment rather than a threat. Begin by allowing yourself small acts of openness, share a personal story with a trusted friend, or admit when you need help. Over time, these small acts build up your emotional resilience and open doors to deeper understanding and compassion, both for yourself and others. The true magic of vulnerability lies in its ability to foster authentic connections and pave the way for profound personal and relational growth. Chapter 8: The Ego's Role in Society. Politics and Ego. When we delve into the realm of political behavior, both individual and collective, the ego plays a pivotal role. Imagine someone running for office. The desire to win, to be in power, is often fueled by their ego. This isn't necessarily negative. After all, it can drive people to put in the hard work required to succeed. But it becomes complex when the ego overshadows the very ideals that compelled such individuals to enter politics in the first place. If the ego takes precedence over public service, priorities shift from serving the people to maintaining personal power. Collectively, the ego can shape the political behavior of entire groups or parties. Remember a time when political discourse should have been about critical issues that impact us all, yet it turned into a battleground of egos, where leaders were more focused on proving each other wrong than addressing the real problems. This is a prime example of how ego influences collective political behavior. It is disheartening, affecting not just the leaders but also the followers, who might adopt similar ego-driven stances. These ego-driven decisions in politics have significant consequences. Let's consider ego-driven foreign policy decisions. Historical instances show us how leaders, driven by personal pride or the need to prove superiority, have made impulsive decisions that led to conflict and war. On a domestic level, ego can lead to corruption when leaders prioritize their gains over the public good. This erodes trust, making citizens cynical and disengaged from the political process, which is detrimental to democracy. On the flip side, acknowledging and managing the ego can lead to more thoughtful and inclusive political practices. It's about balance. Think of a leader who listens, who understands that being humble and open to diverse opinions doesn't make them weak, but rather strengthens their leadership. This practical yet compassionate approach fosters better decision-making and promotes a political culture of respect and cooperation. Ego in the workplace. We've all been there. A simple disagreement in a meeting spirals into something larger, more personal. Sometimes, it feels like every suggestion you make is dismissed without consideration. It's not just that your idea wasn't liked, it's that it wasn't even given a fair chance. It's hard not to take that personally, isn't it? These are subtle signals of ego at play in the workplace, where power struggles and unmet expectations can create chasms between colleagues. Ego is not inherently bad, it's what propels us to believe in our abilities and push through challenges. However, when unmanaged, it can become a ticking time bomb. Imagine a scenario where two team leads, both highly competent, consistently clash over project directions. What's often at the core of their conflict isn't the project's benefit, but whose idea will reign supreme. This is where power struggles become apparent. It's not about the work anymore, it's about winning. Ego can twist cooperation into competition. Even the most well-intentioned feedback might be perceived as a personal attack, leading to defensive postures and reduced collaboration. When everyone is focused on protecting their own ideas, true teamwork takes a backseat. Understanding ego's role is the first step toward nurturing a harmonious workplace. I remember discussing a project overhaul with a colleague who resisted every suggestion. It felt frustrating until I shifted my approach, focusing on understanding his concerns rather than pushing my ideas. It wasn't about who had the better plan, but why he felt his approach was more viable. Once we started to communicate on that level, cooperation blossomed, leading to a much stronger project outcome. Managing ego requires empathy and self-awareness. Picture a team meeting where critical feedback is being given. Instead of focusing on how it affects you personally, view it through the lens of opportunity for growth. This shift in mindset can pave the way for a more open and constructive dialogue. Additionally, honoring others' contributions goes a long way. Rather than seeing colleagues as competitors, appreciating their strengths and integrating their insights can build a more inclusive and cooperative environment. Regular check-ins for constructive feedback and acknowledgements can create a culture where ego doesn't dominate, but rather, everyone feels valued and heard. One practical tip that I've found invaluable is embracing the idea of a team success mindset. Whenever faced with potential ego conflicts, channel your energies toward the collective goal rather than personal accolades. By aligning personal success with team achievements, everyone works in harmony rather than in competition. Practice this consciously in your daily interactions and watch the workplace dynamics transform. Ego and social media. I've often found myself scrolling through endless feeds, feeling the subtle tug of comparison. It's intriguing how social media has a unique way of awakening the ego within us. The ego craves validation, seeking likes, comments, and shares as forms of approval. This digital applause can become addictive, pushing us to present only the most polished and curated versions of ourselves. Imagine posting a photo and eagerly awaiting the response. When the likes start pouring in, there's a rush of satisfaction. The ego feels celebrated. But what happens when the response isn't as grand as expected? There's a sense of deflation, questioning whether our worth is tied to these virtual affirmations. Social media isn't inherently negative. It offers a platform for connection and self-expression. Yet, the ego can twist these opportunities, making us yearn for constant validation. It's important to understand this dynamic, recognizing when our online personas are more about feeding the ego than authentic sharing. I've struggled to find the balance between genuine self-expression and an ego-driven online persona. One moment, I share something deeply personal, hoping it resonates with others. The next, I'm consumed by the desire for validation, crafting posts specifically to gather attention. True self-expression is often vulnerable and raw, a stark contrast to the polished facade we might present to gain approval. Social media can become a stage where we perform, but it's essential to remember that each post tells a story of who we are or aspire to be. Reflecting on our motivations can help. Before posting, consider why you're sharing this moment. Is it to connect, inspire, or simply to be heard? Or is it to seek approval and feed the ego? Feeling secure in our identities allows us to share genuinely, without the need for validation. I found value in engaging with others authentically, commenting and celebrating their journeys without the ulterior motive of reciprocation. Another approach is to set boundaries. Spending mindful time on social media, rather than mindlessly scrolling, can create space for genuine connections and reduce ego-driven behavior. Engaging in activities offline that nurture self-esteem can diminish the need for virtual affirmations. We can use social media mindfully, ensuring it reflects our true selves rather than molded by ego-driven desires. Authenticity fosters deeper connections and a more fulfilling online experience. Chapter 9: The Ego's Impact on Mental Health. Ego and Anxiety. Exploring the relationship between ego-driven thoughts and anxiety takes us on a journey deep into our psyche. The ego, in its essence, works tirelessly to protect us, to maintain an identity we've crafted over years. Yet, this very mechanism, in its efforts to shield and support us, can sometimes lead us down paths riddled with anxiety. Anxiety, in many ways, can stem from ego-driven thoughts. These thoughts often revolve around fears of judgment, perceived inadequacies, or the need to live up to certain standards we've set for ourselves or believe others expect of us. I remember vividly feeling a tight knot in my stomach as I prepared for a big presentation. The pressure I felt was immense, not merely because of the task at hand, but because of my ego-driven fears. What if I mess up? What will they think of me? These relentless questions were my ego's way of trying to safeguard my self-image, but in reality, they only heightened my anxiety. This inner turmoil is something many of us face. Our ego's protective measures can sometimes misfire, leading us to overthink and worry excessively. Through understanding this connection, we can begin to untangle ourselves from the clutches of anxiety. One effective strategy I've found is to reframe these ego-driven thoughts. By recognizing when our thoughts are being fueled by ego, we can take a step back and question their validity. For instance, when I felt the pressure of potential judgment during presentations, I began asking myself, am I certain that others will judge me harshly, or is this my ego speaking? By addressing my fears head-on, I learned to detach from them and, in turn, reduce my anxiety. Another valuable technique is practicing self-compassion. Instead of berating ourselves for feeling anxious, we can acknowledge our feelings and treat ourselves with kindness. Saying, "It's okay to feel this way, many others do too," can make a significant difference. Additionally, engaging in mindfulness practices helps in keeping our ego in check. Mindfulness enables us to stay present and observe our thoughts without getting entangled in them. Through regular mindfulness exercises, we can train our minds to focus on the now rather than on the ego-driven concerns about the past or future. To summarize, the ego, though it tries to protect us, can also be a source of our anxiety. Understanding and addressing the influence of the ego on our thoughts can provide powerful strategies to mitigate that anxiety. Reframing our thoughts, practicing self-compassion, and engaging in mindfulness are practical steps we can take to live more peacefully. The next time you feel that familiar pang of anxiety, take a moment to reflect. Perhaps it's your ego trying to tell you something. By listening with compassion and understanding, you may find a path to a calmer, more centered self. Depression and ego. I remember a time when I felt deeply trapped by my own mind. It was like being stuck in a never-ending fog, and the more I tried to escape, the murkier everything became. This experience became a cycle that I couldn't seem to break. The reason, as I later discovered, was my ego. Our ego isn't just about feeling superior, it's also the part of us that takes criticism deeply to heart and nurtures our insecurities. It tells us stories about how we are not good enough or how we are failing. This constant internal dialogue exacerbates depressive states, creating a downward spiral that's tough to break out of. Imagine a scenario where you receive some negative feedback at work or fail to meet your own expectations in personal endeavors. For many, the ego takes these instances and magnifies them, creating a narrative of inadequacy. This isn't just feeling bad about a mistake, it's about internalizing the failure as a reflection of our entire worth. That was me, holding on to every negative thought as proof that I would never be enough. This led to a constant state of self-criticism and depression. Understanding this correlation was an eye-opener for me, making me realize the power my ego held over my mental health. But there's a way to counteract the ego's negative impact, and it's something more profound and gentle: self-compassion and self-acceptance. It wasn't easy at first. Offering kindness to myself felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. However, I began with small steps. Instead of berating myself over mistakes, I tried to speak to myself as I would a friend. Would you call your friend a failure for a single misstep? Of course not. This mindset shift didn't happen overnight, but gradually, as I practiced more self-compassion, the tight grip of my ego began to loosen. Practically, this looks like daily affirmations, moments of mindfulness, and recognizing and celebrating small victories. When my inner critic rears its head, I try to understand its origin. Is it fear? Is it a deep-seated belief from the past? This understanding helps me confront and soothe my ego-driven thoughts. Similarly, I worked on accepting myself fully, flaws and all. Perfection is a myth that our ego loves to chase. By embracing our imperfections, we undermine the ego's power over us, making space for a more balanced and kinder mental state. A practical tip that helped me immensely was journaling. Each night, I would write about the day's challenges, how my ego reacted, and then consciously counter those points with compassionate responses. This process allowed me to externalize my thoughts, making it easier to manage them. It's a habit that's therapeutic and enlightening. Try it, you'll be surprised at how much lighter you can feel by simply extending grace to yourself. Ego and therapy. It's often said that the first step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. In therapeutic settings, the ego can be that sneaky culprit many of us don't realize influences our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. From my own journey, I remember sitting in my therapist's office, feeling justified in my frustrations. It took gentle probing and insightful questions for me to realize my ego had constructed a fortress, protecting me from perceived threats. This recognition was crucial, showing how the ego operates not just as a defense mechanism but as a barrier to true self-awareness and growth. Working with my therapist, I began to understand that the ego isn't inherently negative. It serves to protect our self-image, but it can also distort our perceptions. For example, during conflicts, I found my ego clinging to "I am right" instead of "what can I learn?" This shift in questioning was transformative. By identifying these ego-driven patterns, we can start to unravel them. It's like uncovering layers of preconceived notions to get to who we genuinely are. Therapy provided me with a safe space to explore these layers, allowing for gradual but meaningful self-transformation. Professional support is invaluable when dealing with ego-related challenges. I recall one session where I was asked to describe a recent argument from a third-person perspective. Telling the story objectively made me see how much my ego had inflated minor issues into major conflicts. My therapist provided not just validation, but tools to manage these challenges. Techniques such as mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy helped me observe my ego's reactions without judgment. This non-judgmental awareness was a significant breakthrough, teaching me to approach my feelings and behaviors with compassion and curiosity instead of criticism or denial. Engaging deeply with ego work in therapy doesn't mean diminishing who you are, it means understanding and integrating all parts of yourself. To anyone starting this journey, remember, every step you take is progress. Embrace the process with patience and trust. One practical tip I can share: keep a journal of your reflections and experiences. Writing about your feelings and insights helps solidify your learnings and track your growth over time. This can be a powerful tool in your ongoing journey of self-discovery and transformation. Chapter 10: Ego's Influence on Creativity. Ego as an artistic muse. There's something powerful about acknowledging the ego as more than just a part of our psyche that craves validation. In my journey, I've realized that the ego, often seen as a source of vanity or arrogance, can actually serve as a beacon for creative inspiration. When we're driven by an inner desire to prove ourselves, to make a mark, or to stand out, we tap into a well of creativity that might otherwise lay dormant. I've personally felt the rush of ideas flowing when my ego whispers, "Create something astounding, something that no one can ignore." It's exhilarating, almost intoxicating. This isn't about inflating one's self-worth at the expense of others, but rather about harnessing that inner drive to fuel your passion. Embracing this aspect of ego doesn't mean losing touch with reality or disconnecting from artistic integrity. Instead, it's about striking a delicate balance. I found myself at crossroads where my ego-driven motivation could have easily led me astray, tempted to compromise the essence of my art for sheer recognition. It's a challenge to stay true to your vision while allowing your ego to push you towards excellence. What has worked for me is setting clear boundaries for my creativity, reminding myself why I started and what I truly want to convey through my work. When ego-driven ambition meets genuine passion, the results can be phenomenally rewarding, not just for us as creators, but also for those who experience our art. One instance that stands out vividly in my memory is a project where I was driven by a desire to outdo a previous success. My ego was blazing, but I found a way to channel that energy constructively. I revisited my core principles, maintained my artistic integrity, and allowed my ego to push boundaries within those parameters. The outcome was a creation that was authentic yet innovative, and the feedback was incredibly fulfilling. It's crucial to remember that our best work often emerges from this harmonious interplay between ego and authenticity. Ego's blocks to creativity. When I think back to the countless times I've struggled to find my creative spark, one common enemy always seemed to lurk in the shadows: my ego. Imagine feeling that irresistible urge to come up with an ingenious idea, but instead, you find yourself caught in this relentless loop of self-doubt and self-criticism. The ego tends to cling to the familiar, to what it already knows or what it has been praised for. It whispers that venturing beyond this safe harbor could lead to failure or, worse, to embarrassment. Creativity requires a free flow of ideas, a readiness to explore uncharted territories without fearing the consequences. My own experiences taught me that the ego often erects barriers to innovation. It bombards us with expectations and perfectionism, turning any attempt at something new into a battleground. One poignant memory for me is an instance when I was tasked with creating a campaign that needed to stand out. Rather than freely brainstorming, I felt shackled by the thought of having to surpass my previous successes. This self-imposed pressure stifled my creativity, leaving me stuck with uninspired concepts. Until I realized this was my ego speaking, I couldn't move forward. The path to overcoming these ego-driven blocks involves a conscious effort to recognize and then transcend them. I started by allowing myself to embrace experimentation without the looming shadow of judgment. A powerful strategy one adopted was giving myself permission to fail. By celebrating the process rather than the outcome, I could engage in creative play. I found it incredibly liberating to explore wild, unpolished ideas that initially seemed impractical. This openness often uncovered innovative solutions I would have never considered under the scrutiny of my ego. Another tactic that helped was fostering a sense of curiosity and wonder. I made a habit of asking what-if questions, which ignited a childlike fascination with discovery. For example, I asked, what if we approached this problem from a completely different perspective? This small shift in mindset dismantled the ego's walls, enabling me to think more broadly and creatively. To anyone facing similar obstacles, an actionable tip is to create a routine that prioritizes creativity. Set aside time each day for creative exercises, detached from any outcome or goal. This practice gradually diminishes the ego's grip, allowing your creativity to flourish. Think of creativity as a muscle that strengthens with use, less subject to the whims of the ego the more frequently it's exercised. A simple yet profound way to begin is by engaging in an unfamiliar activity, like learning a new instrument or trying your hand at abstract painting. The unfamiliar terrain helps bypass ego-driven constraints and encourages a more genuine exploration of one's creative potential. Collaborative ego in creativity. The creative process is often seen as a solo endeavor, driven by the vision and dedication of an individual. However, there is an equally fascinating and complex side to creativity, the delicate balance between ego-driven individual contributions and collaborative synergy. In my own experience, I have found that our egos can both fuel and hinder the artistic process. It's a bit like walking a tightrope: lose focus and you might stumble. Imagine you're in a brainstorming session. You have an idea you believe could be groundbreaking. Your ego is urging you to protect it fiercely, to ensure it remains in its purest form. Yet, this protective instinct can sometimes shut out valuable input from others. I've learned that in these moments, gently setting aside my ego, if only a little, opens up a space for collective creativity. It's about finding that middle ground where your ideas can breathe and evolve through the lens of others' perspectives. Fostering a harmonious blend of ego consciousness and collective artistic synergy is a practice that demands awareness and empathy. It starts with recognizing the power of your individual creativity while equally valuing the contributions of your collaborators. Think of a jazz band, where each musician brings their unique flair, but the real magic happens in their harmonious improvisations. There is something deeply enriching about seeing your initial idea transformed and elevated by the group. In practical terms, this means actively listening, offering constructive feedback, and being open to changes. When we talk about ego in a collaborative setting, it's not about erasing it, but rather cultivating an ego consciousness that understands the fluid dynamics of creativity. One useful approach I use is to remind myself of the ultimate goal, to create something truly remarkable, something that often requires a collective effort. By channeling our egos into a shared mission, we are not diminished, we are amplified. This mindset brings a sense of unity and purpose, making the creative endeavor more fulfilling and the outcomes far richer. The next time you find yourself in a creative collaboration, consider this: each individual contribution, ego-driven or otherwise, is a piece of a larger puzzle. Cherish your unique input, but also embrace the transformative power of collective effort. Remember, it's in the harmonious blend of our strengths and perspectives that true creative brilliance is born. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the ego's theater, how we play different roles in life. As we conclude, I hope you have gained deeper insights into the complexities of the ego and how it shapes our behaviors, relationships, and self-perceptions. Understanding the ego is not just about recognizing its influence, but also about learning to balance it with humility and authenticity. By confronting the ego, embracing vulnerability, and cultivating mindfulness, we can transcend the limitations it imposes and move towards a more genuine and fulfilling existence. Remember, the journey of self-awareness and growth is ongoing. Continue to observe the roles you play, challenge the masks you wear, and strive to connect with your true self beyond the ego's illusions. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best on your path to self-discovery and authentic living. Stay true to yourself, and let your inner light shine brightly in all the roles you choose to play.